Yes.
Could you suggest a few concrete actions that we might be able to take to further what you're suggesting?
Yes. I think it's really important that you pay attention in your local communities about voting and voter suppression. I think it's really important that you pay attention to where you spend your money and what companies you spend it with and what you spend it on. Personally, it drives my husband crazy that I'm always looking to see whether or not people in the American Legislative Exchange Council have made anything that I buy. For those of you, how many of you know what ALEC is? Okay. ALEC is the American Legislative Exchange Council. They're a group of businesses and largely conservative legislators who create model legislation and then move it up in the ranks in state legislatures around the country. They are the people who worked on the SB 1070 Papers, Please law. They're the people who worked on the Stand Your Ground law that has passed in Florida and 24 other states. They're actually trying to introduce it in New York. They spend a lot of time, after Stand Your Ground, ALEC spent a lot of time defending itself while corporate sponsors pulled out. And I think it's really important that you go online and start reading about ALEC if you don't already know it. Look around at the companies that are part of this exchange and begin writing to them about how you're not spending your money with them. Because it really matters that you do that. Corporate PR people do not like getting letters from people. They don't want to hear about what you don't want to buy. And I make it a point to do that. And I want to just say something about that kind of economic boycott. Nobody's pure. But that doesn't mean there isn't something you can do. All of us are complicit, but it doesn't mean there isn't something you can do. Every one of us who puts our money in a bank or gets up in the morning and goes to the store is complicit. We can't help it. The system is built that way. They're all intertwined, and sooner or later they all connect to one another. But that doesn't mean that we can't take targeted and specific action about people whose work and whose investment is contrary to the democratic process. So that is at least two things I would recommend immediately. And write physical letters if you can. Hi.
Hi. Do you have any thoughts on why our country has moved so far to the right so that even a compassionate conservatism that George W. Bush talked about is now not even on the table?
Actually, I have several theories. My first theory is what at least one commentator has referred to as Obama derangement syndrome. There are people for whom the continuing idea of an African American president is representative of the end of civilization as they know it. And I don't think it's an accident that the Secret Service reports about threats to the president have gone up 400% since he was elected. I don't think that it's been an accident that we've seen this rash of racist statements and racist commentary and jokes and email and all these things that people are sending out. I think that if you read the blogs and you read the little comments under the blogs, you can find all the little trolls who get on and talk about how awful it is and they can't wait to reclaim their country. Because it's so inconceivable that someone is black and president at the same time. It just can't be true. And so I think that all of those kinds of regressive forces have kind of concentrated themselves. And they found common cause with one another. I think that's one of the huge reasons why. I also think that on a larger level, people are panicked because, and it was official yesterday, for the first time, people who are not white have become a majority in the United States. And that by the time our children are adults, my kids are teenagers, people who are not white will be the majority in this country. And for some people, this totally reverses the idea of who an American is. And so I think it's a reaction to try to reclaim what they believe is really America before it's too late. How many of you read the blogs about the Hunger Games? Anybody knows about the Hunger Games? It was a huge controversy about the Hunger Games. It's this series of books. It's like the next Harry Potter book, only it's about these kids. And the main character, one of the main characters, is a woman of African descent. Only they don't say she's a woman of African descent. They say she's got dark skin and brown eyes, and they talk about her in the books. But when they make a movie, they actually cast a girl with dark skin and brown eyes, and they tweeted about this for weeks. About how they didn't really, people tweeted about how they didn't really care anymore because it was this black woman, so they didn't really matter. It didn't matter to them. So just if you want to read the tweets in their entirety, go online and type in tweets Hunger Games racism. It will make all your hair fall out. It really will. So there's surfacing. It's like somebody said. One of my friends said it's like having an infection, and that we're clearing the infection. I think that's an optimistic view. I don't know. I hope that's true. But this is like the last gasp of fever before. It's also economic. I also think it's economic. I think that whenever people are struggling and hungry, they want to blame somebody. And having a black president is as good a thing as any. So, that's part of what I think. I probably have more theories, but they're not coming up. Yes.
Rosemary, one of the things that has occurred to me is that possibly at the root of a lot of what you're talking about is a very basic fear, and that the fear is being encouraged and manipulated. I don't know if that's true, and I wondered if you had any thoughts about fear as an underlying factor in the hatred that's being shown.
I've always felt that fear had a lot to do with it. Sometimes when you are reading some of these things, especially when the fear is around race, it's almost as if people are waiting for revenge kind of thing. It's like, okay, if people of color are the majority, then we're not going to be safe because they're going to be mad at us for all the things that happened before. It's why whenever you hear Rush Limbaugh talking about something, the word reparations inevitably comes up. Like, you know, everybody's sitting around tapping their feet, counting up the days that their ancestors were in slavery so they can like charge people. It's really quite, it's visceral that way. So I think that there's a lot of that too. But I also think people are just afraid, like all human beings get afraid. You know, if you thought you were going to be able to stay in that house that you sweated for, and you can't. If you thought you were going to be able to retire and you can't. If you thought you were going to be able to send your kids to college and you can't, you're scared. You know, you may not have a career like a minister or a journalist like my husband, because, you know, we just figured we'd never retire anyway. You know, but what if we had planned on it? We wouldn't be able to right now. So I think, separate from the racism and the other things that surface, there's also the real human fear about what's going to happen to me. What's going to happen to me in a country where I don't know if I can go to the doctor, even now, because the Supreme Court has a case that may make it impossible for me to go to the doctor and pay for it. Where am I going to live? How am I going to eat? For a lot of people, this is a real basic question, especially in light of some of the statistics I was talking about. So it's not just that people are racist. It's not just that people are homophobic. It's just that they're human and scared. The problem is the way they talk about that human and scared piece is scary to me.
One facet of the scariness for me that you didn't talk about explicitly this evening is the ecological side. I have a hard time imagining that we're going to avoid catastrophic ecological collapse in the next century. And I find myself sometimes wondering, what's the point in even trying to get people to be nice to each other if the whole damn planet is going to fall apart? And then I say to myself, well, how are we going to have any chance of stopping that from happening if we can't get people to be nice to each other? And I end up kind of chasing myself around in this circle.
Well, you know, it's a really interesting thing that you talk about, because it's one of those things that years ago I used to feel very torn about. I don't feel as torn anymore. But I used to think to myself, when I was very young, that this was a distraction from the emergent and urgent issues that face people. Like if you don't have a job today and you can't feed your kids today, if the earth's going to fall apart in 40 years, you'll be dead anyway, and so what are we going to do about that? But the truth is that all those things are interconnected and self-replicating. And people of color, particularly, are more vulnerable to all the climate change and the climate crisis that we're talking about. There are whole nations that are about to be wiped out because of the rising levels of water. And we don't seem to be able to wrap our heads around the significance of that. We just know the weather is really bad and getting worse, and we don't quite understand where that is.
We got 100 million people who are going to have to leave Bangladesh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where are they going to go?
Well, see, if you're in the United States, you're not going to be worrying about that, right? Because this is all a myth. Did you know that? Climate change is a myth. I wish I had an answer. I don't. I only know that there's no way to deal with any of these things without having to deal with the others, because they all touch one another. Yeah.
But you know, I know that I listen to a lot of MSNBC a lot. And I go, I really ought to be listening to Rush Limbaugh, some of those people, and get the other view, which I always consider I know the other view anyway. But I passed a truck recently that had on there, the liberal media, I don't believe anything from the liberal media. What do you do when you've got a population of people who want to spend all their time shopping in the mall, worried about whether they've got nice enough clothes to wear to school, and it's as though they don't think about anything else. They're in this bubble, like Bill Maher talks about, and how do you get people to begin to educate themselves more?
I'm not sure you do. I'm not sure you do until it's a visceral thing for them. I think, frankly, that people are in bubbles because they're scared. Because shopping is a great stress reliever. And every one of us uses it. Let's not pretend. I've never seen a tote bag I didn't like.
We don't have to shop in the mall.
You know, you can always do it online. And what I worry about is those of us who consider ourselves universalist, progressive, liberal religious people. I worry too much. I worry that we spend too much time talking about them as though we weren't them. Because we're them. I know I'm them. It's Friday night. If I weren't here, I'd be online looking at QVC to see if there was some philosophy makeup I could be buying, because they do this 2-hour special. I actually know QVC. I learned about QVC when I was pregnant, because they bring stuff to my house and I didn't have to carry it around in the heat. So we shouldn't pretend we're not them. You know, we may buy different things. We may shop at Whole Foods, or as my husband calls it, Whole Paycheck. But we're not any different, really. We're still influenced by the same corporate culture. We still need to soothe ourselves on occasion from things that are scary to us. We still are overwhelmed by the magnitude of the problem. And I really do believe that that's one of the reasons spirit is so important. Why religious community matters, because it's the only buffer for a lot of us. I mean, even evangelicals need church for the same reasons we need it. They may say different things in there, but they still need that sense of community and that sense that someone's going to be with them in the trials of their lives. The trials of their lives may feel more personal and less political than ours feel, because we do politics. We eat, sleep, and breathe it a lot of the time. But it's still real. And so I think we all need to educate ourselves around the things that we hold in common. This is a frightening spectacle. I'm serious. If I didn't have a conservative, Republican, born-again Christian brother, I probably wouldn't be saying this. But see, I can't get rid of him. And I love him. He's actually my favorite brother of all my brothers and sisters. I can't stand his politics, but I love him. And so I've had to engage in ways that I probably wouldn't engage if I didn't have that person in my life. And we have to figure out how we make common cause with folks around things that matter to both of us. Because I think that's one of the things. It's why doing interfaith work is so important. For me anyway, it's why Occupy Faith has been so wonderful for me, because I've gotten to work with people that I might not otherwise have worked with. That the economic stuff has got me at the table with people who don't understand why I would go to Albany and lobby for marriage equality. So I have to sit at the table with them. We're not as willing to do that as we ought to be. Because it's hard.
It is hard.
How many of you hang out with people who are politically more conservative than you? How many of them are in your family?
Just rang my doorbell.
It's tough to do. It's tough to do. I mean, I can't listen to Rush Limbaugh. I can read conservative people, but I can't listen to them. I can read it. When I listen to them, smoke starts coming out of my ears. And I just can't go on. I just can't go on. But I have to know. Sometimes I can take it out and talk to my brother. Then he'll make me mad. My husband used to time when we would hang up on each other. We're better now, but he used to just sit there and go, 5, 4. And listen to see who would slam the phone down first. Because it's really hard. But that's what I think we need to do. I think that's what we're called to do. That's our work.
Yeah.
The thing, and you're talking and all of my work, things happen so fast these days. You know the ad with the iPad, that's 29 seconds ago. It's like,
Oh, right. I actually love that commercial.
So that when everything is so fast and everything is so uncertain, people do cling, they go to the bubbles, they cling to the fundamental. They cling to someone telling them what the reality is. This is your reality, you're okay, stay right there. And so we're scared too.
Yeah.
Where is that faith center that can keep us open, can keep us compassionate to those who have taken a bubble and hidden within it, like the people in Michigan. I mean, I can't imagine living in those places where their government has been taken away from them. You know, and so I sit here and say, well, what would I do if I lived here? What difference could I make? So where do we ground ourselves in this unbelievably fast changing world? And then people say, well, climate change isn't real, or Arizona, which totally blew my mind when they passed a law to say that a woman is pregnant 2 weeks before she's pregnant. And I say, well,
How would you know?
it used to be you were pregnant or not. What is this 2 weeks before you're pregnant? You're pregnant. And if you do something to prevent it, you can be criminally charged. The state of Arizona.
See, I think
These things are happening all over. These bubbles are coming up.
But see, I think it's really important to distinguish between people who are hiding in those bubbles because they're concerned and they want some kind of firm foundation, and the people who are creating that.
Absolutely.
Because the people who are creating it don't have any illusions about this. They know exactly what they're doing. It's a power issue. Who just said that?
And what is it?
Yeah.
10,
It's a power
the
issue.
10 men that are controlling the country. You know, the Koch brothers, David Freese, they went right down the list of those that are funding the Citizens United. We're being controlled by 10 white.
And that wasn't an accident. Because
No,
if you
it
like
wasn't.
power, why not get more? Now let's be honest, if we had the power, would we be trying to get more? Would you? I'd be trying to get more. So some part of me is not mad at them for trying to get power. I'm more angry that we aren't working harder to get some. And I don't mean that in the kind of let's create an empire thing.
Absolutely.
But we aren't strategic This is, at the risk of sounding like a conspiracy theorist, this was something that people thought about 40 years ago, 50 years ago. I got into this argument with somebody when I was talking about why it is that conservative think tanks and foundations will fund operating funds and liberal think tanks and foundations will not fund operating expenses. Conservatives will turn on your lights, your gas, pay your rent, keep your phone on, so that you can do what you need to do to create the illusions that you're creating. All those folks like Dinesh D'Souza and all those folks who were going to Dartmouth, somebody paid for them to go to school. They didn't just win a scholarship because they were great guys. They invest in what they want. And they've been investing for decades. And part of what's happening to us is that we are living with the consequences of that long-term investment. We don't fund operationally. We like to fund programs because we get to see, we get to go, we get to look at the little children, we get to go to school, and that's great, but we don't keep the lights on anywhere. Go to the Ford Foundation or go to any of the foundations that fund the stuff. Go to Beach. Beach doesn't fund anybody, keep anybody's lights on. But lights may be what they need. And it's one of those things where we have to prepare to be strategic if this is stuff we want to go. If we don't see the world we want, we have to be willing to get together and plan it and invest in it so that we can create it. Like, I want to know why, I'm actually going to call the UUA on Monday and find out why we're not making a statement about Michigan. If we are people whose principles are rooted in the democratic process, we ought to be having a fit right about now. Because this is a direct threat to the democratic process. How can you tell people that the people they voted for have to get up out of office and go home? How do you do that? And what's to stop them from doing it to you? When is it your turn? It scares me beyond belief.
Let's take one more question.
Okay, Joyce Lynn.
Thank you. It occurs to me that many of us have short attention spans. We want to go on to the next wonderful thing and to work, as many others do, over time, through the tough times and the successful ones, to be persistent. It's somehow something we look upon as difficult, but even impossible and maybe inappropriate, because we have to be in the forefront of fill in the blank. And that's something only we as individuals can deal with. How much time are we willing to put into your favorite concern, your deepest concern? What are you willing to sacrifice in the interest of whatever this is? I think we have some kind of aversion to spending a long period of time and maybe sacrificing in the interest of something we really claim we believe in deeply.
I think that's a really good point. It's almost like we got ADD around the stuff that we care about. And, I think that there's a lot to be said for that. It's really, I think that our congregations that are most successful around this stuff are the people who stick with a project, and they stick with it over time, and it's something that they care about, and they do whether it worked out really well the last time or it was really bad the last time. And I think that we need to revisit that. It's not, actions of immediate witness aren't enough.
Those are easily abandoned.
Yes, and usually are. Now, I have to tell you, though, that they're great when you go lobbying. I love whipping out all that stuff when I go lobby. But the rest of the time, it's really tough. It's really tough to make them work. So I think that one of the things we have to do in our self-examination is to do what Joyce says. What are we willing to stick with for the long haul? And what are we willing to fund for real? Because you can bet the Scaife Foundation is funding it. They're funding the opposite of what we want, and they're funding it long term. The Olin Foundation is funding the exact opposite of what we're thinking about, and they're funding it for decades. just another long-term investment for them. I guess I'm done, huh? Thank you so much.
I don't know how to thank Rosemary enough.